Hello, welcome. I'm Sohail Anwar and I'm delighted to have your time and your attention. And it's not going to be too long today, but what you're going to learn is going to change your life. It's going to change the way you think. We've put over 2,000 people through this webinar and the feedback that I've had is incredible. People have pretty much come back and said to me that it's changed their outlook, it's changed the way they view their career. Now, let me just introduce the webinar. The title of it is How My Salary Went from £27,000 to £100,000 a year in 3 years by developing the right Excel skills and the right career mindset. So let's just go straight into it. So there will be, you have the opportunity to ask questions afterwards. You can send them to me by email and I'll get back to you. So a bit more about me. My name is Sohail Anwar. I'm a Londoner, born and bred. I'm in London right now. I've been a professional. My career has typically been in finance, banking, management consulting and government, but most of it has been in banking and finance. I'm also a project management expert, and so that's the vocation that I developed. I started out doing more technical things and analysis, and then I moved over to project management. I've got career and Excel skills, so I'm a contractor, I'm a consultant, if you will, which means I work directly for myself and I consult and contract for big global companies, typically FTSE 100, big, kind of big corporates. But in recent years, I've started helping people with their Excel skills and also career coaching. And really the focus has been on helping people to increase their salary. So really what I'm trying to say is that I've walked the walk. So now I know that's all a bit me. What about me? It's all me. But really all I'm just trying to say is that I'm just qualifying myself for you so you understand who it is that is giving you this information. It's not random stuff. Now, the other thing is, as I mentioned, yes, my salary went from £27,000 a year to £100,000 a year in 3 years, but within a 7-year period, I was earning about £190,000. Now, as a consultant and a contractor, that's quite a lot. In recent years, it's come down a bit, simply because, and I'm being very honest and upfront with you, it's come down a little bit, and that's simply because I've changed my focus. I now have 3 children, so I either work less hours or I work in more less kind of aggressive sectors, if you will. But also, really, the main reason is because I'm now getting income from other sources, so businesses and investments and that kind of thing. And so the goal is for me is to have my career, but build up all of my other sources of income. And really, the reason I can do that and be in a position to do that is because I put in those hard yards first in my career. I learned the right skills, I got the right mindset, I had the mentors who helped me to do that. So really that's what I'm trying to tell you here. Now, I know some people, the idea of talking about salary is disgusting, it's vulgar, and why are you talking about salary? It's not the British thing, it's not the British way at all. But I think that's ridiculous. I think that's a falsehood. Whenever I talk about salary, people say, Sahel, you're very money driven, you're very materialistic, but really it couldn't be farther from the truth. I'm not materialistic at all. I'm not into possessions and owning fancy things. I'm simply into being free and having a freedom-oriented mindset. So that's what I'm talking to you about. And having a job, and let me be very clear, having a job does not mean that you're enslaved. I know there's this thing, whenever you go on the internet and you try and work out how you can improve your salary or increase your money, people will say, jobs are for suckers and slaves. And that's not true at all. There are huge benefits to working and having a job. Like I completely left my consulting and done my own stuff, and I didn't find that as satisfying as I thought. Maybe because I was institutionalized, I've spent far too much time in jobs. But really, I'm digressing a bit. But I'm trying to make a point that there's a lot of benefits to having a job or a career where you are working for others. There's nothing wrong with that, and actually there are huge benefits. And I'm going to tell you how best you can improve your salary if that's your position. Now, Yeah, there you go. I'm just qualifying myself, really. So now I'm going to take you through this section where it's something that really interests people. And before I start this, you may think, or a lot of people think, you say, hell, you're talking nonsense. This is not possible. So let me break this down for you. So in 2007, I'm going to take this from 2007 to 2016, which is where about my earnings peaked. And then they kind of reduce only slightly after that, out of choice. So in 2007, I was working as a business analyst, and my skills were very basic. I couldn't do much when it came to Excel, but I could see that there were some others in my team, and they could do more advanced things, and I was really impressed by them. And looking back now, they weren't that advanced. They were barely intermediate. But back then, when you can barely write a formula, these people were doing things like data validation and filtering and things like that, and I was very impressed. So I thought, I'm going to improve my Excel to some degree. And then in 2008, I got my first role in financial services, and it forced me really to start improving my data skills. So I was doing, managing my data effectively by how I keep it in Excel, and I'll talk about that later. And of course, just getting better at analyzing. In 2009, I started working in my first consulting job, and I was working with a lot of text-based data. So I was working on some unfortunate cost-cutting projects, and I needed to had a lot of resource data. So I had to understand exactly how you manipulate text, and obviously I had to become very good at logic building business processes through logic. And just my being by virtue of being a consultant, we do a lot of reporting and we do a lot of PowerPoint. So my those skills improved. Now in 2010, that was a tipping point. That's the point where I hit 100,000, as my first proper contracting role. And really what improved, and I was working for Lloyds Bank, and I was working on a huge project for them around migration, and I was sitting in the central team, and my role really was to deal with the MI, or the management information or reporting, if you will, MI skills. So at this point I got really good with you doing things with advanced formulas, array formulas, really good lookups and so forth. But really what it was that I started to use macros and VBA a lot more, and I was able to get a huge amount of work done. Now, following that, in the years following that, what I got really good at, went deeper into my VBA macros, and I was getting really good at automation. And I went from I was into investment banking at this point, so I worked for a number of investment banks, and they really required me, or whoever, the role that I held, they required that person to be able to do a great amount of work, a huge volume of work when it came to dealing with reports, producing reports, analyzing data, interpreting data, and really the only way that I got that done was by having brilliant automation skills. And one of the things that I was able to do was in my interviews was to demonstrate my automation, and this really secured me huge roles. So I was working in companies like Deutsche Bank, Barclays, HSBC, and so forth. Now, after that, if you look, when I got to my peak salary point in 2015, that was nothing to do with Excel, believe it or not, nothing to do with Excel. So have I misled you up to this point? No, not at all. And I'm going to come and tell you a bit more deeper about what it is, but just to give you a little bit of a spoiler, what it is that you have to have some kind of progression in your career. You cannot just rely on your Excel skills. You have to be, what's more important than Excel skills is in the background, you have to be building a vocation. Now, when I mean vocation, what I'm saying is that you've got to be some kind of an analyst. You've got to be perhaps an accountant or someone like that, or you've got to be in project management, and that was my particular field, project management. And I was able to rise, and then eventually it was able to open up doors for me that required me to be more, do more senior things that didn't involve Excel so much. So we'll talk about that. Now, this is really important. So if we conclude that more Excel skills, better Excel skills equals more salary, it's an oversimplification. And this is really, I don't want to mislead you, because some of you might be looking at these and thinking, hang on, I've got these skills. I've already got these skills. I'm not earning anywhere near that much. And the reason that you're not earning anywhere near that much is because you may have just developed the skills, but you haven't developed them in tandem with the ability to sell those skills, and also the correct, having some kind of a path in place, a roadmap in place. We'll talk about that. So before we go on, I've got a question. Is Excel still relevant? It's been around forever. It feels like it's ancient, right? It's been around since the 90s, probably 80s, in fact. But no, it's not. It's not irrelevant. Excel is more relevant than ever because companies are producing more data than ever. And they're not producing big data. This is what I mean. People think, oh, we're producing more data. It's big data. Big data is an entirely different field. It's an entirely different skill set. And it's actually not as big as you think in terms of the amount of work involved in that. It just happens to be a skill set and a sector. It's not. It doesn't mean that the world is going to be big data. Jobs more. There will be more big data jobs, but really there'll still only be a subset of data jobs. It's not big data, it's what I call small data. Small data means that it's inter-company based data. So if you think about the kind of financial transaction data, maybe if you work in projects, it's project management focused data. It's things which are probably tens of thousands of rows, maybe up to millions of rows, and companies just are producing this by the bucket load because of the fact that we moved to a much more data-oriented culture. Now, there's no doubt about professionals, you've got to have Excel skills. Like 15, 20 years ago, if you had data questions and whatnot, we'd have to ask IT to get involved and say, can you help us to work out this, to make sense of this data? And really, that was never their job. 10 years ago, professionals found that it was just a bit quicker to have skills to do it. And if you could leverage Excel, then it just means that rather than having to go and ask someone, you can just do that for yourself. And now, since we've moved to a much more data-oriented culture, professionals with good Excel skills, they can do exactly what they need to do. And not only that, the more advanced that their skills have become, the more easily they can manipulate the kind of the bigger and the more disparate kind of data that we're getting. So it's completely prevalent, and you must have the skills to be able to manipulate, manage, and deal with data. So the other thing that's really important that people gloss over is Microsoft tools exist in every company, and it's something clever that Microsoft did many years ago when they built Windows. They were selling Windows licenses to companies. They were selling PCs to companies, and then they realized they had this big opportunity, which was to create productivity tools for companies. So if you think about your three bread and butter tools, which are Excel, Word, and PowerPoint, and probably the fourth one is Outlook. I'd say 4 of them. Pretty much every company has them. Now, some companies that are smaller and they're startups, they're not necessarily using these tools. They're a little bit more free to do as they wish. But in the big companies, and the companies that I really strongly suggest that you try and get into and you try and work for, they are currently using them, they were using them, and guess what? In 10 years' time, they're still going to be using them. If you look at what Excel has done, it's now moved from what you call a perpetual to an evergreen model, where it was Excel, or Office 2007, 2010, 2013, 2016, now and 2019. But now we have something called Office 365. And so Microsoft have made a huge play by doing this. And they're basically saying, listen, guys, not only are we going to keep developing Excel, we are going to continue to dominate this whole market of productivity tools. So Excel is not going anywhere; it's just going to grow. And if you're not developing your skill set in an ever-increasing culture of data, then you will be left behind and you will eventually get replaced. And I know that sounds like a bit of fear-mongering. It's not. It's just me having your back. That's all I'm trying to do here. And here we go. It's the de facto tool if you're an analyst, if you're in more a financial role like accountant controllers, finance business partners, if you're working in change or project management, so PMOs, PMs, management consultants, or pretty much any corporate professional, then you are going to be using Excel heavily. And if you're not using Excel, let's say if you're working in a company and they use some kind of fancy tool, like for finance people use Oracle or SAP or Hyperion or anything like that, or smaller companies might use things like Xero, you have content management tools like SharePoint, you have, which is brilliant, by the way, you have other things like Clarity for project management and so forth, Plan View. Guess what they all do? They all have this one button that does this: press it and export to Excel. So, but surely in 2019, there's got to be better tools, right? We've got a plethora of tools. Are there better tools? No. None of these come close to Excel. And as I said before, even if they were as good, and they're not anywhere near as good, it's all about the tools that you are given. You can only play the cards that you have been dealt. And every single company has Excel and the Office tool. So the way I say is that Excel is the universal language of offices. That's the way that I think about it. So Excel for me equals transferable skills. It's almost become a bit of a verb, in circles, in corporate circles, or Excel it, or PowerPoint it, or Word it. So that's how ubiquitous this is, and you cannot just know it. So this is, when it comes to my students and what I teach, it's not just about, you must not just know it, you must excel in it, to use a bit of a wordplay pun there. So it very much is still king and queen. Now, there's one fundamental reason above all others why Excel is the best. If you've got any ideas, just hold them, think about them. You can say them out loud, but I'm going to come back to it a little bit later. So now at this point, I'm going to take a sip of water because I'm a little bit nasally today, so I'm running a bit of a cold, but that's all good. That's okay. Let's not detract from the content. So I'm going to shift gears to talk about career. So I've talked talked a bit about Excel and why you need it. I'm going to talk about career, and then I'm going to come back to the actual Excel skills. And it's very important. This section is arguably more important. This is the section that is going to kind of deepen your thinking a bit on the idea of career progression. So now, and I cheekily call this what you don't learn at Harvard about career progression, but what do I know? I don't work, I have never been to Harvard, so I shouldn't really push judgment on them. So now, this is really an issue. When people think about their career, they think, okay, I've got my skills, I've got my qualification, and I've got my experience, and people tend to isolate those things. And my suggestion is to not isolate those things, but to kind of merge them and think of them in holistic terms. And so I'm going to show you why everything needs to connect. So. And the idea is that it's going to help you to set you up for success. So here are the three major factors to access high-paying roles. Now, and I call this the anatomy of a high-paying job. So number one is geography. Now, it may sound quite an intuitive thing. Yeah, where you work makes an impact. So, but let me be very specific about this, and let me explain to you how you should work this out. If you don't live in a big city, in a big town, I do recommend people. I say to them that you should make it a goal, especially if you're young. But even if you're not young and you have children, you should think about moving to a city or a town which is going to just give you access to high-paying roles. So, but the way you do that is this: you can go to Wikipedia, or you can just type in Google Global Financial Index, and it's going to take you. Go to the Wikipedia page, and the Wikipedia page on this is brilliant. It updates a lot. So right now, what you see will not necessarily, it might change tomorrow, it might change next week. It's always kind of moving up and down and fluctuating. But really, this is the list of, and it will give you the list of the 100 most, how best to say, the most financially buoyant centers in the world. So right now, London is at the very top. New York is number 2, and then you've got Singapore, Hong Kong. And really, the idea is that these places are this is where financial hubs exist. So historically, there was a lot of trade here, whether it was through typically shipping. If you look at a lot of these shipping towns, and that's where the banks established themselves, and that's where historically, traditionally, that's where they've remained. And people build centers and businesses around these financial hubs. And so these are the places which are going to have branches or actual headquarters of some of the biggest organizations in the world. And this is where I recommend that you target. Now, I was very lucky. I was born in London. I live 20 minutes away from the city of London and Canary Wharf. So to be honest, it was very straightforward for me. But I've had students who lived maybe up north in the Midlands somewhere, and I've recommended them, and they've done that. And now there are really easy ways that if you do get a job, you can do things like use Airbnb. There's like websites out there which you can, I think they're called couch surfing or something like that. I'm not quite sure. You can Google those and find out, but there are really easy ways now to, if you remain living in wherever you live, but during the week you can come and live for relatively low cost. So that's geography. Now, number two of anatomy of a high-paying job is sector. Now, sector is huge. So I've listed a few sectors there: finance, energy, pharma, tech. Now, in the future, there's going to be a whole sector, most likely just around AI. There's probably going to be more sectors specific around biotechnology. This is where a lot of the money is being invested. This is where a lot of the biggest startups are really are being focused. So those will come into prominence. But one thing that has remained for a couple of hundred years at least, if not more, and will continue to do, and that is that the king of all sectors is finance, and it really, there's a hierarchy to that as well. It goes investment banking, other kinds of banking like retail banking, and then you've got things like insurance and other services. And I probably missed out a few things around banking, which were things like investment management and maybe hedge funds and things like that. But hedge funds tend to typically be a lot smaller in terms of company size. But really, that's the kind of hierarchy. So you want to be in, if you want to access jobs, good high-paying jobs. So I've given you two things there, geography and sector. And the third thing is, this is a big one, and a lot of people clock onto this, but it's what I call proximity to transaction. Now, what I mean by that is that the closer your work is to where a transaction happens, the more that you will be compensated. So let me make this clear. So if you think about in an investment bank or in any company, if you are responsible for sales, you are responsible for bringing business into your organization. And so the people who bring in business, the people who are salespeople, they are typically at the very top of the food chain, because if it's not for them bringing in, then no one else has work. Sure, a company has to fulfill that work. So if you think you have operations departments who have to fulfill that work, but they wouldn't have that work if it wasn't for the salespeople and the traders or the transactional people who are doing that work. So really, the closer you are to the transaction, the more you will work. Now, a lot of people who work with Excel are not necessarily sales-oriented people. There might be an aspect of sales of what you do, but if you think about the average corporate professional, your accountants, your project managers, or your analysts and things like that, we are not, and I'm one of those, and we are not revenue generators. We are revenue protectors. So that's a kind of it's not a direct bringing in of business, but it is a protection of the bottom line. So, and for that, we also get reasonably well compensated, not as much as the salespeople, but that gives you some food for thought. Now, I know salespeople, and now in investment banking, if you're a salesperson or if you're a trader, you've got to be absolutely brilliant with Excel, by the way. But if you're working in another company, and you're a salesperson, it really does help to have strong Excel skills, because you're constantly able to understand data, you're able to interpret data, you're able to understand where you should focus your efforts on, and being able to look at lots of sales data and being able to interpret it can really help you with that. So those are three very important things: geography, sector, and proximity to transaction. So really the gold standard is you live in London or New York, you work in a big investment bank, and you're probably a sales or a trader. That is the very apex of earnings. That's where you're going to earn your most. Now, very few people are going to get to that point. I have a few friends who are there, and they're already at a point. They're in their 30s, and they're at a point where they probably don't have to ever work again, but they continue to do so. I'm not quite there, so I have to make up for that in other ways, by doing investments in other businesses and so forth. Okay. Now, once you're into a company, you've got like your organizational hierarchy: junior, mid-junior, mid-senior, senior level roles, and then executive roles. Now, here's an interesting thing. Most people get stuck at the mid-level. Now, why do they get stuck at the mid-level? Well, there are a number of reasons, but one of the reasons, well, some people say everybody will reach their level of incompetence, and for most people, that's the mid-level, because getting to the mid-level is quite structured. It's quite it's straightforward, but it requires you to put the effort in and put the hard yards in. But to get beyond that, you're starting to get into territory where there's less structure, and generally speaking, people prefer structure. But once you get past that, you need more creativity, you need more problem solving, and you need a lot more risk management than you have previously had. And most people don't have that. Most people, even smart people, straight A students, they simply will not have that, and that's a mindset. Now, how can you avoid getting stuck? Now, although I've told you a few things of why people get stuck, I can give you an example of, well, not just an example, but I'm going to tell you what the formula is, and you need to respect this formula, because it's not something that I've come up with. It's not my thing. It's something that I've observed, and it's been around for many, many, many years, and it's really simple. You add value by solving problems for the right people. So there's a lot in there. I'm not just saying add value. I'm saying you add value specifically by solving a problem, and you solve a problem for the right people. You don't just solve problems for Marie down in HR because she might go out on a date with you or anything like that. I'm being a bit crass here, apologies. But you identify people, and who are the right people? The right people ideally are the people who, what I call, are budget creators, people who will have a budget every year and they've got to do something with it. And I'm not just talking about project managers, but I'm talking about people who are much wider. There might be what we call program directors, perhaps, or there might be heads of departments, but every year they have a budget and they have to spend it. You want to solve problems for those people because they have money to help you to solve their problems. And then really the second part of that is it's simple. Just ask to be rewarded. It's a very simple step, and most people don't do it. I don't just mean you don't extort people. You don't say, I'll do this for you, but you've got to give me a rate. It's not like that. You simply help people out, and you really move the needle for them. You really make them look good. You resolve serious problems and issues, or you help them with growth-oriented work. And by doing that, 90% of it is that's the ask, is just in doing it. The other 10% is, listen, hey, the way I would typically do it in a very casual conversation. Listen, I want to do more of this. It's I've really enjoyed working for you. I love it and want to do more of it. And I would be really grateful if we can talk about my compensation, my salary, my rate, and so forth. It's very organic, natural. And if you do the big bit of actually doing the work and adding the value and helping moving the needle, then that bit is just so straightforward. And it's almost, for me, it's almost always met with a absolutely, of course, why would I not do that? You're a superstar. I want to keep you. Okay. Now, again, and it's just rinse and repeat. That's it. You keep doing that. You just keep doing that. It's like a cycle. Rinse and repeat, and it's just going to work out for you constantly. Now, the other point is this is a very important one. This is about mindset. Okay, there's two ways to think about your career, and for a lot of people, they fall into this trap of the job. And I try and push people to think about the career, and there's a big distinction here. And really, beyond that, I want to say that your job, believe it or not, the way I think about this, is the enemy of your career. Let me say that again. Your job is the enemy of your career. The job can often make you very myopic, and it can make you very tunnel vision, because you're thinking, right, I've got a job to do and I've got to get it done, and it's done, and you're met with deadlines, and you're met with various kinds of pressures, and there's meetings cropping up and things just overtaking your diary, and it really prevents you from seeing the bigger picture. And this is something that all of us fall afoul to. I've fallen afoul to this before as well. So let me quantify this a little bit more. Let me give you the exact point. So if you're job oriented, every day is like Groundhog Day. It's like starting again. If you've seen that brilliant film by Bill Murray, he wakes up at 6 a.m. every day, and it's the same day, and he goes through the same day again and again and again. And that's what your job can be like. If you're career-oriented, you can step outside of that, and you can see that, hang on, there's a bigger picture here. There's something going on here, and I need to think more in terms of growth. Now, if you're job-oriented, you might just follow a path. A path is laid out for you. And what is that path? Every year, you'll get some kind of objectives that you have to work towards. However, if you're more career-oriented, you create your own path. You don't let a bunch of objectives dictate your path. You create the path. You add value. And as I said, and adding value is about solving problems for the right people. And the other is that your work makes you get emotionally attached, and you might be emotionally attached to your particular job, your team, the work that you do, a particular project that you're working on, but more often than not, just the company and the fact that you may have been there for many years and so forth. But if you're more career-oriented, now this is a cold one, but it's a very important one. You understand that ultimately you are a number on a profit and loss statement, and that's all that you are. And that at any point, if the company takes a turn for the worst, if the shareholders intervene, then you can be cut. And it's very important to have that in the back of your mind, and not fear that, but understand that that is a risk. It's a risk that you have to accept. And when you accept that kind of a risk, then you take measures to do things about it. Like, so one of the things that I do is that I'm constantly flirting with the market. Now, by that I mean I'm looking at the job boards. I'm keeping in touch with my colleagues and saying what's going on, what's happening in other companies that they're working in. Is there more work happening? And I just keep my ear to the ground. And that way, if something happens, then I know that I've got a few options that I can immediately explore. Now, the other one is that, and this happens to a lot of people who are job-oriented, is that you get upset if you don't get promoted. And this is a very real thing every year. Typically, each year as you progress, there's less and less path to progression. Now, if you're more career-oriented, you're not worried so much about that. What you're focused on and what you're worried about is just aligning yourself with the right people. So as I said, you solve problems for the right people. And then I call this the slipstream method, where you simply get into someone's slipstream, like, as they move up, you move up as well. As they progress, you progress with them, and it really is about finding the right people who can do that with you. Now, if you're job oriented, here's a big one. It just feels like you don't have enough time. All right, but this is also a fallacy of not having good skills, and we're going to go into that. But if you're more career-oriented, you're thinking about creating time. And there's two ways that you think about creating time, but I'll come to those in a bit. So, well, let's come to it now. How do you create time? There are two ways, as I mentioned. One is that you delegate. So if you've been given a task, you may have a team, or you may have somebody junior in the team that you work for, or there may be other people who are more suited for it and they have capacity, and so you would delegate to them. But not everybody has the luxury of doing that. Now, if you are a corporate professional, as you should be, if you're watching this, the other option is to automate. So let's talk about this. Now, Excel allows us to automate, and ultimately it allows us to save time or create time. It's another form of creating time. So as I mentioned before, people isolate skills, qualification, and experience. Let's not do that. So I'm continuing with that theme. Now, ultimately, treat Excel skills as stepping stones. So for example, you will learn Excel, and then you will learn some skills to automate. And the way you automate is with VBA, predominantly VBA. You can sprinkle some Power Query in there, it can really help. And then you want to have some good advanced formulas, because they can really help. But really the chunk of it is VBA. We'll come to that later. And then you save time with that. Then you repurpose that time. You don't just save time and you use that to scroll through your Facebook feed. You use that time to add value back to your company. And then you'll become someone who's a lot more value add than a much more value add proposition than those around you. And when you do that, you start to impress the right people. You start to impress the execs, and then you simply ask. That's it, and then doors will open for you. It's really that simple. It's not a complicated thing at all. It just requires a certain amount of skills, and it requires you to just do those things, just go and execute. So, and as I've said this before, people lack the courage to ask, don't lack the courage to ask. When you have the right skills and when you're doing the right things and the right steps I've talked about, you've got to end with the ask, and there's nothing wrong with that at all, to ask. So I talk a lot about, selling yourself. So don't just do things without it's very important that you have a mindset where where your efforts are acknowledged, and no one's going to blow your trumpet. You've got to be the one who blows your trumpet. And guess what? Senior people, they don't get it's not something cringeworthy for them. It's not a negative thing for them. They like that because they're the same themselves. They got to their executive positions by constantly selling themselves, doing work and selling themselves. And if you do the same thing, they're just going to see a kindred spirit in you, and they're going to respect that and like that. So as I said, no, you've got to be proactive. Do not be reactive. Don't think, I've done this great piece of work and I'm just going to sit back and let the opportunities roll in. No, you should never ever think like that. You always have to follow up, and you always have to ask. Here's the thing, a lot of corporate professionals, we don't want to be salespeople. We don't want to think that we're salesy. We didn't go to university and all that and college to be salespeople. But the reality is that the world runs and revolves because people engage in sales activities. That is the truth. And in your work, in your line of work, you're constantly selling. You build a report and you communicate information out to people. You've got to sell that to people. You're in a meeting and you're trying to steer it in a particular direction and you're trying to get a decision. You've got to sell people on that. So you're constantly selling. And so you're selling your work, but you also must never forget to sell yourself as well. So that really is it. And that's what's going to create opportunities for you. So let's now delve into Excel. Finally, we're going to go a little bit more deeper into Excel. So now I want to get this concept of breadth versus depth. The further that you go in your career, you've got to shift your development to more specific, in a more specific way. So you start your career out, you're a bit of a generalist, and over time you become a specialist, and that's very important because there are so many roles, there are so many companies. In order to go senior and senior, you've got to become better and better and better. And the way you become better is become more focused. Just like taking you've got when you have the sun, it keeps you warm, but you get a magnifying glass and focus that, and you can start to burn things. And that's what you've got to do. You've got to be on fire, and you get it by being focused on specific things. And it works exactly the same way for skills like Excel skills. So specificity cultivates expertise, and that's what we have to ultimately be. We have to be experts, and that's what we're paid to be, experts. And that's when you start going into the more high salaried brackets, when you become an expert. So we've got to focus. So now I'm going to explain how this applies to learning Excel skills as well. So I'm going to take all of the tabs. If you think about Excel, here's the tab. You've got the Home tab, Insert, Draw, Page Layout, Formulas, Data, Review, View, Developer, and you've got all these things that Excel can do. And that's just kind of displaying it. There's so much more to it than that Excel can do. But guess what? How much of that do you actually really need? You don't need a lot. And I'm going to overlay that with really it's almost like a heat map. And you can see that I'm just focusing in on certain areas like conditional formatting. There's a bunch of charts. Obviously, the formulas are important. A little bit of Power Query. Some of the data tools like filtering text to columns, remove duplicates, validation, and then obviously VBA and macros. So now let's look at that in 3 dimensions and see what that heat map. So I put that heat map, but now let's make a 3D version of that heat map. So this is quite cool. A lot of people like this, and really you can see the level of importance that I'm placing on these things. So if you can see immediately, you'll see that VBA, I put a huge amount of importance on it. Now a lot of people still don't buy into it. They think, nah, VBA, it's just a thing. Do we really need that? We've got all these other tools. Yes, you do need it. You really do need it because you can, the work that you do, it's very specific to you. If you have the skills to automate the little steps and the processes involved, then that's where you save your time. And so you can see the formulas, they're very important as well. They're super important. There's a bit of Power Query in there, and you can see that's not supremely important, but it can be very important. And when you start dealing with more volumes of data and more complex data, then Power Query, the significance of things like Power Query and another tool called Power Pivot, they will increase. So how do I know what these topics are? Well, I've spent 13 years in the real world on huge multi-million pound projects, as small as 1 million, and at the very peak, I've gone as high as over 100 million. I've worked on those kind of projects. I've had a huge amount of jobs, so 12 jobs I've had in 13 years as a consultant. I've had 29 job offers in 13 years. And you have to remember, I'm a contractor, I'm a consultant. I'm not like a salaried employee, but I get paid on a daily rate to come into companies and do, and I'll stay there for a few months, all the way to a year and a half, as long as the project goes on. But while I'm there, I'm pretty much an employee like everyone else, but I just happen to be working on a contractual basis. But as a result of doing that, I have to apply, reapply, constantly apply, reapply, and I've got that thing down to an art. And I've been promoted as well as a result of it, and I've been able to unlock a huge amount of opportunities. And a lot of that has to do with my Excel skills. So your goal as a professional should be to become a better professional. Excel should make you a better professional. Don't think I'm going to be great at Excel, I'm going to be a master of Excel. You've got to be a great professional, and then that helps you to put things into context. So most books and courses, I find they teach you to be a better Excel user. So it's important to understand who is teaching you. So you've got to learn from a professional. I find when I learn from people who are pure teachers, what they do is they'll teach you every aspect of a methodology or a tool set. Like they'll teach you everything in Excel. They teach you all 400 plus formulas. You don't need to know 400 plus formulas. You need to know barely 10% of that many formulas. So let's talk a bit more about Excel. Now, before you do anything in Excel, you've got to do something very crucial, and that is to make sure your data is in what I call a long, boring list. Now, I love saying long, boring list because it sounds exciting, actually, believe it or not, because people think, hey, long, boring. The word boring tends to make people perk up a bit. Boring. So I like calling it long, boring. And here's an example of that, where you have data and it looks like it's in a nice format. On the top left here, you can read it, and you can see what you are, but actually it's not good for working with, for doing analysis on. For analysis, you need your data to be stored vertically. You've got to what I call tag it, and it can be inefficient because you're repeating lots of things, but that's okay, and you don't need any formatting on it. You've got to ideally you want to remove formatting, because things like that can slow it down. One of the ways that you can manually, if you have your data like that, you can manually do it, but one of the really good ways of doing it in recent years is with Power Query. So Power Query is called Get and Transform. It takes data and it will help you to transform it. I don't want to talk too much about that, but just I want to plant that seed in your head that Power Query is a really useful tool. And to get it doing basic things for us is actually quite easy, just a few clicks if you know what you're doing. Now, there's only 4 things that you ever need to do in Excel to solve problems. Let me take a sip of my water before I just tell you about those. Ah, lovely. Okay, so the first is to find information. Number 2 is to treat information with rules. Number 3 is to deal with non-numerical information. And number 4 is to summarize that information. And that's really the kind of the 4 kinds of analysis. That's what analysis is. And that's how, that's the methodology that I've worked at. I call it the Earn an Excel approach to it, 4-3. So 4 ways to solve your problems. And there's 3 kinds of problems. And the 3 problems are typically you have to store and track your data. You have to do some kind of ad hoc analysis on it. And the third is that you will have to communicate and just produce insights likely on a regular basis. So those are the 3 sort of three problems and the ways that you solve it. So let's go into number 1, finding information. So the way you find information is formulaically you will use things like VLOOKUP, match, index, choose, min, max, small, large, and there's a few other things as well that I have put in there that are a bit more niche, but really those things cover the majority of your finding needs. And then the other great thing that you can do to find information is my favorite thing in Excel, which is autofilters. So your autofilters can really just help you to, if you've got your data stored nice and vertically, you can just sit there and play around with the autofilters and just view. It's good for what I call eyeballing data. Now, number 2, treat information with rules. This is huge. This is basically about logic building and about building business processes and business logic into your work that you do. So you've got a bunch of data and you need to put it through some kind of black box, and it will help you to get the answers that you want. And that black box is a logical black box, and you can use things like if, you can use choose, you can use if error, is error, but really if is the big one. And you have things like ifs, ifs, you have things like switch, with they're more niche kind of formulas, but really those things, if it covers most of the scenarios, and choose is another great alternative. And then for non-formula, really data validation is great for that. It's a way of, it helps you to create that black box as well. Now, the third type is to deal with non-numerical information. So text information, basically, we're talking about here. And so again, the formulas that you would use, left, right, mid, you use trim, search is brilliant, and you use that with, especially when you use it in conjunction with the left, right, and mid formulas. And then you have some things to clean up your data, which is proper and clean. But you can also clean up your data, again, with Power Query. I'm coming back to Power Query again. You can also do some really complex cleaning up of data as well, and then you can have it set up in Power Query. But again, I don't want to delve too much into Power Query right now. The other way of doing it is the standard Excel functions, remove duplicates and text to columns. Now, the things, you've got the formulas on the left and you've got the other functions on the right. So the other functions are really good for one-off analysis. And when you're doing things which are more recurring and you need them to be repeatable, you want to use formulas, or ideally you want to use VBA. Now, number 4 is kind of the end game of all of this, and it's to summarize our information. So really the 2 best formulas for summarizing are SUMIFs and COUNTIFs. They do a tremendous job because they're conditional formulas. So you can sum by conditions, you can count by conditions. And if you've got to go a bit more niche, then you've got things like SUMPRODUCT, which can really do some clever kinds of conditional summing. You've got sum and count A and subtotal. Subtotal is a brilliant one, especially when used with auto filters, because it can sum by things that you have filtered. It's very unique. And of course, you've got conditional formatting, which is brilliant. It adds an automated layer of visuals onto things like tables of information that you create. Now, the other obvious thing that I haven't talked about, but I will now, are the kind of charting that you can do. And so really, I generally tend to prefer column charts, line charts, pie charts. More recent years, things like map charts have become more prevalent, and they can be really good, but a lot of people just like to shoehorn them in because they just look beautiful, they look visual, and it just makes everything you do add a touch of professionalism. But really, you don't want to do that. You never ever want to complicate things that you don't have to complicate. Yes, it looks sexy, but for the most part, it tends to be overkill. But you can never go wrong with a column chart, line chart, or a pie chart. Now, lots of people don't like pie charts. They think it's unnecessary, it takes up space. But actually, often you don't want to overwhelm the person who's consuming your reports and your information. And pie chart is a good way of doing that, because it can just give you a very simple story about how things break down in segments, and gives the person enough space to really just take it in, rather than get overwhelmed by things like map charts and so forth. Now, I mentioned that there is one fundamental reason above all why Excel is the best. And it really comes down to this: speeding up your work, aka automation. And I mentioned this already a few times, that automation can really just change your life. It really is that simple. Let's talk about this. How do you automate? So automation is taking all those things that we've talked about already. So things like, if you think about preparing your data into long, boring lists, finding information, treating it with rules, text data, dealing with text data, summarizing. Those are all those things, the analysis and the summarization that we've already talked about. Well, VBA, you can use VBA to control all those things. So you can speed up all those tasks. You can, and by speeding up those tasks, you can save huge amounts of time. And let me just delve into a little bit be a bit more specific about this. So things like when you're doing copying and pasting, you're doing lots of copying and pasting. It might be single cells, it might be entire charts, it might be entire ranges of data. If you have to gather information from various sheets and so forth. Now, for this you can use Power Query as well if you have to gather information. But often there's a lot of value in just remaining in VBA, and sometimes VBA can do that really easily as well. I still do a lot of my gathering with VBA. You can automate the production of reports. Now, if you have a regular report, like a month-end report, a finance report, you can automate that end to end. You can automate processes. So if you have a process where, let's say you update a holiday calendar you've got to update that once a month, and you've got to ask people for what their days are, you can get them to you can just get them to update their own versions of the holiday calendar. You can absorb all that up, and then you can have some automation which just updates one single source of truth. That's just giving you a fairly basic example, but that's a process that you'd have to do. Other processes that you would have is if you're doing a month-end report, you'd have to on working day -9 you start gathering information, on working day -2 you put the analysis together, and on working day -1 you produce your report. And so you have so many steps. You've probably got 100 plus steps in there. And guess what? You can take each aspect of it and automate that. The other great thing you can do is make Excel talk to PowerPoint. Now, specifically, I said PowerPoint. You can also make it talk to Word and Outlook and any other of the Office suites, but PowerPoint is a great one. A lot of corporate professionals, we make presentations, we make PowerPoint packs, slide packs, and I've done some incredible stuff with Excel to PowerPoint. I'm going to show you that in a minute. So, but before I do that, really what I'm trying to say here is that what VBA allows you to do and what you want to do is to stop wasting time on mechanical tasks. So anytime you do copying and pasting, anytime you're going through a series of steps, it's a mechanical task. And really, you want to think to yourself, is there something that a child can do? Is there something that a robot can do? Maybe not a child, but a robot. Because one day the robots will take over, Skynet will rule the world. And I'm just kidding, but you do want to think in terms of mechanical tasks that can be automated. Now, when I spoke to the brilliant career coach Dave Fikak, who is one of the most prolific tech career coaches, and he's a resume expert, and it was an interview with him and myself elsewhere in our training. Dave said that really the biggest shift happening is that for people is that they need to be able to have skills that help to automate their work. So he deals with a lot of coders, he deals with analysts, he deals with people who work in tech companies, but he said the best of the best, the people who are easily able to get the work are the ones who can demonstrate that they can automate aspects of their work. And that really is where things are going. We're moving more towards automation. Bots are starting to come into our culture. Well, VBA is, if you have VBA skills, effectively you're creating your own bots. That's what you're doing. That's the way to think about it. So let me give you an example. I want to show you this example of a piece of work that I've done where I've got this PowerPoint presentation here that I produce. It's like for a project portfolio. Now I've got a bunch of data that sits behind it, and every week I need to update this, and I've got to update. It's a visual kind of a milestone view. So here's the code that sits behind it. I know it looks a little bit intimidating and sophisticated, but I promise you it's not. Once you dig into it, you realize it's not. And then simply what I would do is I would hit that button, and then there you go. And that data is being transferred into PowerPoint, into the form of these milestone diamonds and ragged by their particular color. When I say rag, I mean red, amber, green. And that's an example of automation. Now I could sit there playing around with it for hours, but not for hours. It would take me probably about 15, 20 minutes. I'm saving 15, 20 minutes there. And there's loads of that. There's just so many examples of where I'm just saving 15, 20 minutes here, an hour there, and these things add up, and they add up. When you add them up, they're huge, and they can add up to, 1-2 days a week, potentially. So thank you very much for your precious time. I really appreciate it, and thank you for listening. And I hope that this training has made an impact on you. I hope it's going to change the way that you think things and you approach your career. And if you've got any questions, just drop me an email on support@earnandexcel.com at any time, and I'll answer those for you, your questions for you. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.